you have to, because if you don't, we won't be here when you get back. You'll have to stop in the 21st century for info first. Our records only go back to about 1993, and most of them are damaged. From there, you'll have to rely on your own warper. He has to. He's all we've got.
How can I help you?
Do you consider yourself well versed in U.S. history?
Well, I mean, it's sort of my job to... Ow! Ah! What was that for?
Do you feel like cooperating?
No, I don't feel like cooperating.
That's good. You can get this out of the way then. I've taken a sample of your DNA, and with this device, I can target any one of your family members and make them feel pain, or erase them with a press of a button.
Erase?
Yes. As in, they will no longer exist. I assume you have an internet connection. Where's your computer?
What are you looking for exactly?
Give me information on one of the key events that led to the Union's victory during the First Civil War.
Key events? Do you mean like battles? Like the Battle of Gettysburg?
No, not the battles. There had to have been something before the war that helped the Union win.
Clay.
What?
You know, Henry Clay, author of the Compromise of 1850. I'm sorry, who are you?
In your future, the United States will divide against itself again, and new Confederate States of America will arise. The goal of these Confederates is to overthrow the oppressive U.S. government. Organization. Descendant of the KKK that you know of, known as the Klan. The Union's army is known as the Tolerance, and they have almost succeeded in wiping out the Klan. However, at the end of their hope, the Klan designed a device capable of transporting a single person through space and time to change history in their favor. I have been selected to go back in time to the First Civil War to prevent the Union from ever winning. I am the 27th Grand Wizard of the Klan. My name is Purity. Explain the Compromise of 1850.
Alright, well, I suppose I'll speed it up then. In 1850, Henry Clay wrote the Compromise in order to lower the tension between the North and the South.
Why was the tension?
Well, to put it simply, slavery. But, to put it correctly, I'll have to go into more detail. The Mexican-American War was won by the United States, and in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States received a section of Mexican land known as the Mexican Cession, which consists of present-day Utah, New Mexico, and other parts of states. The Senate and Congress is based on equal representation. Every state sends 2 representatives to Congress. In the 19th century, because of this equal representation, the amount of slave states and free states being represented in the Senate were equal. In 1820, Henry Clay created the Missouri Compromise. And this compromise had 3 main points. The first point is that the latitude line at 36 degrees and 30 minutes would be the boundary. And this boundary would represent the difference between the North, which would have no slaves in it, and the South, which would be allowed to have slaves in it. The 2 other parts of this would that Missouri would be introduced as a slave state, and that Maine would be introduced as a free state in order to keep the balance in the Senate. 2 years before America's victory in the Mexican-American War, David Wilmot proposed the Wilmot Proviso, and this proviso stated that any state created from the land in the Mexican cession would not be allowed to have slaves in it. Of course, at this time there was equal representation in Congress, which meant that the pro-slavery congressmen shot this down immediately. The purpose of these two, the Wilmot Proviso and the Missouri Compromise, was to reduce the tension in the Senate. And that all went swimmingly.
Swimmingly?
You know, swimmingly? Like, good, well, easy, smooth.
I never learned how to swim.
Okay, sorry. Well, these will help you understand better. The Compromise of 1850 was made up of 5 main points, the first of which was to admit California as a free state. In the late 1840s, there was a large gold rush, and many people swarmed California. In 1849, the creators of the California State Constitution wanted to make the state explicitly slave-free. However, this decision had 2 problems with it. The first, the 3630 line of the Missouri Compromise passes right through the middle of California. And because of this, everyone in the south of California technically has the right to own slaves. But if California itself is admitted as a free state, then they can't have slaves. The other problem with this proposal was that if California was introduced as a free state, then the amount of slave states and free states in the Senate wouldn't be equal anymore, because the free states would have one more state, California. Clay's second proposal in the Compromise of 1850 was that the Mexican cession, the land the United States won from Mexico in the Mexican-American War, would be carved into 2 separate territories, the Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory, and that these territories, when turned into states, would have popular sovereignty as the foundation for their government. Popular sovereignty is a term that refers to the ability for citizens in a state to vote to decide whether or not that state should be able to have slaves in it. So, the main purpose of the second point of the Compromise of 1850 was to reduce the tension created by the Wilmot Proviso. Before the Mexican-American War, American citizens had settled in present-day Texas, which was at that time owned by Mexico. However, they were outraged at Mexico's no-slave policy, so the Americans rebelled. And when they gained their independence, they became the Republic of Texas, and the Republic of Texas was later annexed by the United States as a single state. After its annexation, Henry Clay realized that Texas's borders passed the 3630 line, which violated the Missouri Compromise because Texas was brought in as a slave state. Henry Clay saw this as a problem, and so he created this point, which proposed that the United States government give $10 million to Texas in exchange for it reducing its borders, which in turn would prevent conflict from starting in the Senate. The fourth point has to do with Washington, D.C. Slave trade across the seas was outlawed in the United States. Therefore, the only way to get a slave was to trade it with somebody else, buy one, or to separate a slave family. In the years leading up to the Civil War, Washington, D.C. had actually become one of the largest slave markets in America. Northerners in Congress feared that this would corrupt the capital, turning it and other large cities into large slave markets. So they wanted to abolish all slavery from Washington, D.C. The South, however, wanted to protect their trade in Washington, D.C. To prevent this from turning into a large conflict, Henry Clay proposed that slave trade, but not slavery itself, be outlawed in Washington, D.C. The North could relax knowing that Southerners couldn't trade slaves in Washington, and slave owners near the capital were reassured that their way of life wasn't in danger. The fifth and final point of the Compromise of 1850 was the stricter enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. Originally, this act was created to help slave owners in the capturing of their slaves that ran away, and to stop large escape plans like the Underground Railroad, but this act was ineffective, because many northern abolitionists either refused to cooperate with authorities or assisted runaway slaves in escaping from their masters. Unfortunately, the new Fugitive Slave Act provided that participation in the search for runaway slaves was mandatory, and that if you were caught assisting a slave or letting a slave stay in your house, you would be arrested or fined. The worst part of all of this was that any free African American who was born and raised in a free state could be put into slavery if any one person testified to them being a slave. Unfortunately for Clay and the Union, this bill was actually never passed. Stephen Douglas, however, took up the challenge and split the Compromise of 1850 into 5 separate bills, and he was able to maneuver them through Congress at different times until each one of the 5 points had been passed. So then, when all parts of the Compromise... Ow!
Enough explaining. How did this give the North an advantage?
I forgot you had that for a minute. Anyways, to answer your question, the Compromise of 1850, though a failure at first, actually had a more surprising effect on the Union's victory than you would think. You see, my colleagues and I actually believe that the Compromise of 1850 is the event that delayed the Civil War for 10 years. In between 1850 and 1861, there was a lot of tension, but there wasn't much conflict. There wasn't actual fighting other than leaving Kansas. These 10 years are more important than a lot of people think. Every year, in between 1850 and 1861, an average of 300,000 immigrants came to the North. This enormous influx of immigrants significantly increased the North's population. At the beginning of the Civil War, the North's population was at least 14 million greater than the South's. These 10 years also gave the North a chance to increase its industry. And this growth of factories enabled the North to produce more munitions and railroads and trains. The increase in railroad production allowed the North to transport goods and people and weapons all over the North and to parts of the South a lot quicker than the South could during the actual war. Another big part of the industry boom is the boom in mechanized agriculture, which enabled them to produce food quickly and inexpensively, a lot more so than the South could. Because of this boom in mechanized agriculture, the North didn't have to rely on the South's continued supply of goods and food to the North during the war. Around this time period, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas were engaged in a battle of debates to decide who would get the spot of Illinois State Senator. Though Lincoln lost to Douglas in these debates, and Douglas got the spot of senator, Lincoln's popularity and stature in these debates attracted the attention of the newly formed Republican Party, which nominated him as their presidential candidate for the 1860 election. However, because Abraham Lincoln became president around this time, he was able to lead the Union to victory and free the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation and then afterwards the 13th Amendment. The Compromise of 1850 wasn't just a temporary peacekeeper, though that was its original purpose. Henry Clay hadn't planned for it to be anything more. However, after it was passed, it delayed the Civil War for at least 10 years. And in these 10 years, due to the agriculture, industrial, and the immigration booms, along with the leadership provided by Abraham Lincoln, the North gained an incredible advantage over the South. The Compromise of 1850 might have been the final push that led the Union to their victory during the Civil War.
Fascinating. Such a simple bill could create such an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it really could. So if you excuse me.
I won't. Your part in this is not over, historian. Now, give me the longitude and latitude coordinates for the Supreme Court in 1850.
Why do you want those?
Why, of course, to erase Henry Clay from history.
What? Are you insane?
Do not test me, historian. I will not let you stop me. I'm the Klan's last hope. Now give me the coordinates.
You do realize what will happen to you if you kill him, right?
I have. That is why, through that same realization, I have elected not to erase you or any of your family. For if I succeed and restore power to the Klan, none of us will have ever existed anyways.
swimmingly.